Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back in the City of London because, unlike our political class, and I'm talking about those in the Lib Dem, Labour and Conservative parties who, of course, all went to the same schools, all went to the same Oxbridge colleges, and none of whom have ever done a proper day's work in their lives. Unlike them, it's just over 30 years ago that I got off the train optimistically one morning at London Bridge and headed for the London Metal Exchange to make my fortune. So it's always good to be back in the city, and it's particularly good to be here in the Bloomberg auditorium. I have spoken here before, but not for some time, because it's from this very stage, in January of this year, that our Prime Minister, David Cameron, after many years of saying we must not have a referendum on our membership of the Union because I wish us to remain members, it was from this stage where he said he passionately believed that the people of Britain ought to have a say. And I like to think that Mr. Cameron would not have made that speech had it not been for the dramatic impact that UKIP has had on United Kingdom politics. We are shifting and changing the whole debate, and with it, Mr. Cameron has buckled. Mark you, he's already said that whatever the outcome of the negotiations, he will campaign in the referendum for us to vote yes. And that strikes me as being a pretty bad negotiating tactic. There are lots of you in this room from the world of business, and you know when you walk into a room to negotiate with somebody, you have to carry a very big stick. And the stick is, unless you get what you want, you're taking your business away. And believe you me, after nearly 14 years of working inside the EU institutions, I know this, that it's countries like France, countries like Ireland, and countries like Spain that sometimes win concessions because they walk into meetings without carrying a big stick. And Mr. Cameron has thrown the stick away before the negotiations even have begun. Now, I'm a bit confused, Lars, because the title I've got here is The End of the Euro as We Know It, but when you wrote to me and invited me, the title was supposed to be, Is Britain Better Off Outside the European Union? So I'm not quite sure which one to speak to. I'll do 2 minutes on that one and then move on to a theme I prefer. The thing that motivated me to getting involved in politics was one evening in October 1990, I was in a bar called Coates Wine Bar, 108 Old Broad Street, proper old bar that was, and a runner came in to say that Britain had just joined the exchange rate mechanism. Now, I won't tell you what my initial outburst to that was, but it certainly would be post the watershed, because it seemed to me absolutely moronic that we should wish to try and tie sterling against the Deutschmark, given that we were two entirely different economies and at different stages of the economic cycle. And that's what really got me interested and involved in politics. It's what got me thinking that perhaps our political class had been so taken with this Euro dream that perhaps something should be done about it. I firmly hold the view that the Euro was a fundamental misconstruction from the very beginning, and I now feel, over a decade into the Euro project, that a Europe that was split from east to west by the Berlin Wall and communism is now split from north to south by the Euro, and that there are no good ends to this. In fact, I wouldn't just say that Greece and Portugal and Spain are never actually going to become German in terms of their attitude and in terms of their work culture. I even think that right at the heart of the Euro project there is a simmering problem that everybody has tried to ignore, and that is that for over 3 years now there's been a growing competitiveness gap opening up between France and Germany. So right at the heart of the political and economic union there is a growing gap, and that gap of course has been aided and abetted by the election of Monsieur Hollande. Now, I've done my best in my contributions in the European Parliament over the years, when addressing nation-state leaders and leaders of the European Union. I've always tried to be as helpful and constructive as I possibly can. And whilst it's true that I did query where Mr Van Rompuy bought his clothes, and whether he really existed as a human being, I've generally not sought to abuse. They've thrown plenty at me. But when it comes to Monsieur Hollande, it seems to me we simply must have the stupidest leader in the whole of the Western world. Because, not content with the fact that this gap is opening up between these two countries, what is it that he does when he comes into power? Well, he increases the minimum wage by triple the rate of inflation, and of course he introduces a hate tax. A hate tax of 75% that says to any entrepreneur left in France, you know, if you're still here, please hop on the next Eurostar. So there's no question to me that under Hollande, he will have no chance of taming the trade unions when it comes to wage restraint, and that those gaps will get bigger. I think, you know, we'll be here in 10 years' time, and the euro will have collapsed completely. We will finish up with something that resembles perhaps a greater Deutschmark zone. It'll be Germany and the surrounding countries. And you could make an argument that the Netherlands, Belgium, if it still exists as a country, I doubt it will, but you know what I mean. They love me over there. You can make an argument that Germany and the Low Countries and perhaps Finland could fit together inside an optimal currency zone. You could make that argument economically. Whether you could make that argument politically, that the Dutch would want to be part of Greater Germany, I rather doubt. But, you know, and I've engaged with this Euro debate. I've been, I think, very privileged to have a front row seat in the European Parliament. I don't think the planners in the European Parliament quite got it right after 2009, when they decided to give me seat number 20 on the front row and Barroso seat number 21. I mean, you really couldn't make it up, could you? So it's been jolly lucky and very fortunate for me. But I realised some time ago, and I realised it after I met Angela Merkel, because the funny thing is, you see, as one of the 7 leaders of a group in the European Parliament, they have to invite me to all the official lunches and dinners and functions with the world leaders. I'm sure it must stick in the craw when they put the invitation in the post, but I gleefully accept. On the basis that if I can ruin their day, I feel generally better about it. So we had a lunch nearly 2 years ago with Angela Merkel, a lunch which really taught me more about the euro perhaps than anything I'd seen before. So there were 7 of us there, a couple of interpreters and Chancellor Merkel. And I can let you into a little secret about Angela Merkel. She's actually duller and more miserable in real life than she appears on the television. It doesn't necessarily make her a bad person. By the way, I'm not anti-German. Now, for those that think I'm being anti-German, please do not think that. I am married to a girl from Hamburg, so nobody needs to tell me about the dangers of living in a German-dominated household, all right? Anyway, Lars asked me to play this with a straight bat today. I'm not doing very well, am I? So I said, Chancellor, would it not be a liberation for Greece to break out of a currency that she was never designed to be a part of, to have a currency depreciation of perhaps 60 or 70%, and to give herself an opportunity to trade her way back to competitiveness? Yes, of course, there'll be inflation, but at least they'll be back in the game. And would it not be actually a huge relief to hard-working German taxpayers who've just spent 20 years paying for the reintegration of Eastern Germany into Western Germany? Would that not be a relief to them to think their hard-earned money is not going to go in perpetually bailing out countries that should never have been there? And she looked at me sternly and said, no, Mr. Farage, you must understand that if Greece was to leave the Eurozone, other countries would leave too, and that would be the end of our European dream. Now, there's a bit of me that says, get the corks out, you know. But in reality, what she's saying is true. What she is saying is that the political will to hold together the Euro project virtually knows no bounds. And we saw that shortly afterwards with the Draghi put and everything else. They will do what they can to hold this thing together. I do not know what the straw is going to be that breaks the camel's back, economically, politically. Perhaps it'll take civil disorder on a very large scale on the streets of Mediterranean cities. I hope not, and I'm certainly not encouraging that. I hope and pray that in 2014 there can be such dramatic breakthroughs made in the European elections that that begins the end of the process. But I think that left to its own devices, and given the current status quo, the death of the euro will be a long, slow and painful thing. But I think the arguments about Europe, the arguments about the European Union, need to go far more broadly than just talking about the euro and just talking about the single market. I think we need to get to the absolute heart of what is the European Union, why is it here, and I want to speak this afternoon to the theme that I don't just think that Britain should leave the European Union. I am far, far more ambitious than that. I think Europe should leave the European Union. No, and I mean it. I mean it. Because that flag, that anthem, those glass and steel structures, Herman Van Rompuy, what on earth has this got to do with Europe? They've hijacked the word Europe. They've laid claim themselves to a whole continent, and it reflects a total lack of understanding that Europe is not one big political entity. Europe is the most astonishing and extraordinarily diverse continent on the earth, with our different languages, our different cultures, our different wines and cheeses. And what we ought to be doing is we ought to be celebrating the fact that Europe has this diversity. And yes, of course, we want neighbours to live happily together, to cooperate together, and to trade together. But if we really think that Mr. Barroso had a point the other day when he said if there was no European Union, we'd all be back in muddy trenches in northern France fighting each other, it gets to the heart of understanding why these people are wrong. They believe that it is the existence of nation-state that necessarily leads to war, and they're wrong. It is when nation-states are not stable democracies that you get the threat or the problem of war. It is nation-states that don't have democracy or who have lost democracy that become imperialist or become expansionist. And frankly, the idea that by grouping all of these different European countries into one, against the will of the people and without any clear public democratic support, the idea that that will bring peace and harmony is, I would suggest respectfully, given lie to by what we did post the First World War with the Balkans in forging together Yugoslavia. You know, we believed that with Yugoslavia, if we gave all these different warring little nations and provinces one currency, one army, one language and one president, that it would be peace forever, and it's become the other thing. So I think right from the start, the very idea that we had to have a European Union to stop there being future foreign wars, misunderstood that mature, stable democracies do not go to war with each other.